Hey there, this is Max from Play AI, just touching base to see if you have any questions about our ultra-fast voice solutions. We're super excited about the possibilities and would love to chat more. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather here today in pursuit of a noble ideal, equality. But let us be precise about what we mean. Equality is not an abstract utopia where all outcomes are identical. No, true equality is the right to rise, to strive, and to achieve based on merit, effort, and responsibility. It is the right to stand as an individual, to reject victimhood, and to demand fairness without succumbing to resentment. A woman who fights for equality does not ask for special treatment. She does not demand that the game be rigged in her favor. She competes. She prepares herself. She takes on responsibility because she knows that competence, not complaint, is the path to dignity. She is not satisfied with being shielded from difficulty because she knows that the struggle itself is what forges strength. Equality is a word often misunderstood, twisted to mean something it was never intended to represent. There is this prevailing notion that equality should result in sameness, that any deviation in outcome is proof of injustice. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the world operates. Hierarchies exist everywhere, in nature, in societies, in organizations, and even within families. They are not merely imposed structures of oppression. They emerge organically because competence, effort, and ability are not evenly distributed. A hierarchy is not necessarily a sign of corruption. It is often the natural consequence of structure and order. Consider the way a group of individuals come together to achieve a goal, whether in a business, a creative endeavor, or a scientific pursuit. Those who demonstrate greater skill, deeper understanding, and higher levels of dedication naturally rise to positions of greater responsibility. This is not oppression, this is function. If we were to dismantle such structures entirely, what would remain? Chaos, disorganization, and mediocrity. There is a critical difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. Equality of opportunity ensures that everyone starts on the same playing field, that barriers to participation are minimized, that a person's background does not dictate their future. But equality of outcome demands something very different. It insists that regardless of effort, ability, or contribution, everyone must arrive at the same destination. This is not fairness, this is tyranny disguised as justice, because to enforce equal outcomes, one must punish excellence, suppress ambition, and deny the reality of human variability. Look at the animal kingdom. The strongest lion leads the pride. The most industrious ant becomes a worker, while the most passive remains a follower. This is not the result of cruelty or oppression. It is the natural order asserting itself. Human beings are more complex, but the principle remains the same. Those who are more competent, more disciplined, more knowledgeable, and more willing to bear responsibility will rise to positions of influence. And this is not just acceptable, it is necessary. Societies that thrive are built on hierarchies of competence, not arbitrary power structures. Of course, hierarchies can become corrupt when they serve only the self-interest of those at the top. When they no longer function to reward ability and effort, they begin to decay. But the answer to corruption is not destruction, it is reform. If we dismantle all hierarchies simply because some become unjust, we throw away the very mechanism that allows societies to function. Instead of seeking to tear down, we should strive to build better, fairer systems that reward genuine skill, dedication, and responsibility. A woman who fights for equality must understand this. She must not reject hierarchy outright, but must learn to navigate it, to challenge it when it becomes oppressive, and to embrace it when it serves its rightful purpose. She must strive to rise within it, not by demanding special treatment, but by proving her competence, by demonstrating her ability, and by refusing to play the victim. She must recognize that fairness does not mean sameness. and that the highest calling is not to dismantle structure, but to ensure that those who hold power do so with wisdom and integrity. To deny hierarchy is to deny reality. To embrace it with responsibility is to shape the future. There is a seductive narrative in the world today, one that tells people, especially women, that they are victims of an oppressive system, that their struggles are not their own to overcome, but rather the result of forces conspiring against them. This narrative is not just misleading, it is deeply harmful, because the moment you accept the role of the victim, you relinquish your agency, you surrender your ability to change, to improve, to rise above. Victimhood is an easy refuge. It absolves a person of responsibility. If the world is to blame for your suffering, then why should you act to better yourself? Why should you push forward if the deck is permanently stacked against you? This mindset is paralyzing. It breeds resentment, and resentment is one of the most corrosive emotions a person can harbor. It turns ambition into bitterness, potential into stagnation, and adversity into an excuse rather than an opportunity for growth. But the truth is, no life is without struggle. No person is free from hardship. Suffering is an inescapable part of existence. The real question is not whether you will suffer, but whether you will take responsibility for your response to it. Do you let it define you, making you bitter and hopeless? Or do you use it as a catalyst to become stronger, more competent, more resilient? The latter path is far more difficult, but it is the only one that leads to genuine empowerment. Responsibility is the antidote to victimhood. When you take responsibility for your life, your choices, your actions, your future, you reclaim your power. You stop waiting for someone else to fix things for you. You stop demanding that the world change to accommodate you, and instead focus on how you can adapt, improve, and overcome. This is not to say that injustice does not exist. Of course it does. There are real barriers, real struggles, real challenges that women and men alike must confront. But the question is, how do you approach them? Do you allow them to become permanent justifications for your stagnation? Or do you take responsibility for doing everything in your power to rise above them? History is filled with women who refuse to see themselves as victims, who faced enormous obstacles but pressed forward regardless. They did not wait for permission. They did not demand special treatment. They took on responsibility, sometimes at great personal cost, and in doing so, they carved paths for others to follow. These women were not weak. They were not resentful. They were determined. They understood that the world is not fair, but rather than using that as an excuse, they saw it as a challenge. And here's something crucial. Responsibility gives life meaning. People often believe that happiness is found in the absence of struggle. But this is false. Happiness is found in purpose, and purpose is found in responsibility. A woman who shoulders the burden of her own life, who refuses to let circumstances define her, who pushes forward despite the obstacles, that is a woman who is truly free. Contrast this with the alternative, a life spent blaming others, resenting success, expecting the world to accommodate every grievance. This path leads nowhere. It leads to helplessness. It leads to dependence. It leads to frustration with life itself. If you want to fight for equality, then fight for the right to take on more responsibility, not less. Fight for the ability to earn your success, to prove your competence, to rise, not because the system was forced to lift you, but because you climbed. Because that is real power. That is real success. And that is what makes life worth living. Competence is the foundation upon which real progress is built. It is the ability to perform, to solve problems, to contribute meaningfully to society. And yet in many modern discussions about equality, competence has taken a backseat to ideology. People are told that their success or failure is not determined by their abilities, their effort, or their discipline, but rather by social structures, biases, and systemic barriers. The emphasis has shifted from encouraging individuals to develop skills and expertise to demanding that systems change to accommodate grievances. This is a dangerous shift. Because the world does not run on ideology, it runs on competence. Planes stay in the air because engineers understand physics, not because they adhere to a political narrative. Surgeries are successful because doctors have spent years mastering their craft, not because they have been selected for diversity quota. Bridges stand because architects and builders know what they are doing, not because they represent a particular ideology. Ideology, when placed above competence, corrupts. It distorts reality by prioritizing group identity over individual ability, by demanding equal outcomes rather than equal opportunities, by insisting that fairness is achieved not through merit but through enforced redistribution. It suggests that excellence is secondary to representation, that meritocratic structures must be dismantled in favor of artificial balance. And when this happens, society begins to decay. We have seen this pattern throughout history when ideological purity becomes more important than skill and ability, institutions fail. We see it in political systems where loyalty to an ideology is valued over effectiveness. We see it in workplaces where hiring and promotion are based on factors unrelated to competence. We see it in education where standards are lowered in the name of inclusivity rather than raised in the name of excellence. This does not create equality. It creates mediocrity. It ensures that the best and brightest are ignored in favor of those who fit a preferred narrative. A woman who fights for equality must understand this. She must recognize that her value is not derived from ideological alignment, but from what she can do, what she can build, what she can achieve. She should not demand success based on identity. She should earn it based on capability. She should not seek positions of influence as a matter of entitlement, but as a matter of qualification. Because in the long run, competence is what sustains success. The real world does not care about ideology. The real world cares about results. A company that hires based on ideology rather than skill will eventually fail. A government that prioritizes ideological loyalty over expertise will collapse. A society that values activism over competence will stagnate. The only way forward, the only way to create real, lasting, meaningful progress is to insist on the primacy of skill, ability, and individual excellence. This does not mean ignoring real social issues. It does not mean pretending that bias and injustice do not exist. But it does mean that the solution to these problems is not ideological enforcement. It is empowerment through competence. It is ensuring that every individual, regardless of background, has the opportunity to develop the skills necessary to succeed. It is about encouraging effort, discipline, and mastery rather than resentment and entitlement. A truly equal society is not one where outcomes are dictated by ideology. It is one where individuals rise based on merit. It is one where people are judged not by the group they belong to, but by what they can do. And if we forget this, if we allow ideology to replace competence, then we do not create fairness, we create failure. The individual is the fundamental unit of society. It is the individual who thinks, who acts, who creates, who suffers, who triumphs. Without individuals, there is no group. And yet, in today's discourse on equality, there is an increasing push to define people by the groups they belong to, rather than by their own unique qualities, choices, and efforts. This is a grave mistake. When we prioritize the group over the individual, we strip people of their autonomy. We assume that their thoughts, behaviors, and aspirations are dictated by their demographic identity rather than by their own personal journey. We reduce them to representatives of a category rather than recognizing them as complex, independent beings with their own ambitions, struggles, and responsibilities. This is not just philosophically flawed, it is deeply dangerous. History is filled with examples of what happens when societies elevate group identity over individual worth. When people are judged primarily by their race, gender, or class, rather than by their character and competence, the results are catastrophic. We have seen it in oppressive regimes, in brutal conflicts, in discriminatory laws that assume guilt or innocence based on category rather than conduct. When you define someone by their group, you make it easy to dismiss their individuality. You justify collective punishment. You rationalize unfair treatment in the name of correcting historical wrongs. You create division, resentment, and hostility instead of justice. But beyond the historical consequences, there's a deeper personal cost to prioritizing group identity over individual agency. When a person sees themselves primarily as a member of a group rather than as an individual, they risk outsourcing responsibility for their own life. If they are told that their successes or failures are entirely the result of societal structures, they may never take full ownership of their choices. If they believe that their fate is controlled by external forces rather than by their own effort and resilience, they may never push themselves to grow. This is a form of learned helplessness, a self-imposed limitation that prevents true empowerment. To fight for equality, one must first fight for the primacy of the individual. That means recognizing that every person has unique potential, unique challenges, and unique paths forward. It means insisting that opportunities should be based on merit, not on collective guilt or victimhood. It means rejecting the notion that justice can be achieved by punishing one group to uplift another. True justice is only possible when each person is judged by their own actions, their own choices, their own contributions. This does not mean ignoring the existence of systemic issues or historical injustices, but it does mean that the way forward is not through collectivist thinking. It is through individual empowerment. If a society wants to uplift marginalized communities, it must do so by creating pathways for individual success, by fostering education, encouraging personal responsibility, and ensuring that each person has the tools to build their own future. It cannot be done by enforcing equal outcomes, by redistributing success without regard for effort, or by assuming that all members of a group share the same struggles, perspectives, or goals. A woman who fights for equality should not demand recognition based on her gender alone. She should demand recognition based on her abilities, her determination, her hard work. She should not seek advancement as a representative of a collective, but as an individual proving her worth. Because that is where true equality lies, not in group entitlement, but in personal achievement. At the end of the day, it is the individual who succeeds, who fails, who learns, who grows. A society that values the individual over the collective is one that fosters innovation, fairness, and true progress. A society that places the group above the individual creates division, resentment, and stagnation. If equality is truly the goal, then it must begin with the recognition that every human being is an individual first, and that their worth is defined by who they are, not by the group they belong to. Freedom is one of the most valuable things a person can possess, but it is not free. It does not come without effort, and it is never sustained without sacrifice. Yet, in modern discussions about equality and empowerment, there is often a misconception that freedom is something that can simply be granted, that it is a natural state of existence rather than something that must be earned, defended, and continuously upheld. This is a dangerous illusion. Freedom is fragile. It is difficult to attain and even harder to maintain. And the price of freedom is responsibility, discipline, and the willingness to endure hardship in pursuit of something greater. To be free is not merely to be unchained from external oppression. It is to be unchained from one's own weaknesses. It is to take ownership of one's actions, to accept the burden of making difficult choices, and to understand that with autonomy comes accountability. A person who desires true freedom must also accept that they can no longer blame others for their failures. They can no longer depend on external forces to dictate their path. They must navigate the world on their own, and that requires courage, resilience, and sacrifice. There is a common belief that freedom should mean ease, that if one is truly free, they should not have to struggle. This is false. Freedom and struggle are intertwined. To be free means to take on more responsibility, not less. It means that no one is coming to save you, that your destiny is in your own hands, and that if you fail, it is up to you to rise again. And this is no easy burden to bear. It is far easier to submit to a system that makes decisions for you, that shields you from difficulty, that offers comfort in exchange for control. But that is not freedom. That is servitude dressed as security. Throughout history, every great struggle for freedom has required sacrifice. Those who fought for civil rights, for women's suffrage, for political liberty, did not simply ask for freedom and receive it. They worked for it. They endured suffering. They took on responsibility, risk, and hardship because they understood that nothing of value comes without cost. The same is true on an individual level. A person who seeks personal freedom, financial independence, intellectual autonomy, emotional resilience, must be willing to make sacrifices. They must give up short-term pleasure for long-term gain. They must resist the temptation to take the easy path and instead choose the path that challenges them, that forces them to grow, that requires them to become more than they were yesterday. A woman who fights for equality must understand this deeply. She must not see freedom as something that can be handed to her, but as something she must seize for herself. She must be willing to endure discomfort, to work harder than those around her, to face criticism and adversity without breaking. Because to truly be free is to be self-reliant. It is to refuse to be a victim of circumstance. It is to take full ownership of one's life, one's choices, and one's future. But many reject this responsibility because it is difficult. It is far easier to demand that systems change to make life easier. It is far easier to blame external forces for personal struggles. It is far easier to claim that one's lack of success is due to oppression rather than to personal shortcomings. But this is a trap, because even if the world changes, even if every external barrier is removed, a person who has not developed the strength to stand on their own will never truly be free. They will always be dependent on others to shape their destiny. The greatest freedom a person can attain is mastery over themselves. This means discipline. It means self-restraint. It means developing the skills, the mindset, and the resilience necessary to navigate life independently. It means understanding that sacrifice is not something to be avoided, but something to be embraced, because it is the price of becoming stronger. If you want freedom, you must earn it. You must sacrifice comfort for competence. You must trade excuses for effort. You must be willing to bear the burden of responsibility, no matter how heavy it may feel. Because only through struggle, through hardship, through personal growth, does true freedom emerge. And if you are not willing to make those sacrifices, then you do not truly want to be free. You only want the illusion of freedom without the weight of responsibility. But for those who are willing to pay the price, the rewards are immense. To be free is to stand tall in the face of adversity. It is to know that no one controls your fate but you. It is to carve your own path regardless of the obstacles in your way. And that is a power greater than anything that can ever be handed to you.